Pretty much everyone knows the phrase, "I don't get no respect." It was constantly uttered by the late Rodney Dangerfield. But what about you? You as a leader in the church. Are you receiving the respect you deserve? Let's talk about that. Back in a moment.
Welcome to Minister's Toolbox, providing leaders with the tools they need to succeed in ministry. Now, here's your host, Casey Sabella.
Paul said something interesting to Timothy, his protege, who was the bishop over a large region, Ephesus. He had a lot of responsibilities managing the church in that city. But he had a problem. People were not giving him the respect that he deserved. He said these words, "Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity." This thinking less of you in the Greek means to disdain, to think little or nothing of. In other words, he's saying to Timothy, don't allow people to think less of you than whom God made you. Through the years, my experience with many leaders has revealed to me that the majority of pastors are afraid to speak up for themselves. They put up with an awful lot from people. They do allow people to despise them or to think little of them. And there is a spiritual implication to that. You can actually destroy your church by allowing people to do that. Now, how do you stop people from doing that? Well, that's the reason I'm sharing with you today. It says in 1 Thessalonians, "Dear brothers and sisters, honor those who are your leaders in the Lord's work. They work hard among you and give you spiritual guidance. Show them great respect and wholehearted love because of their work, and live peaceably with one another." So Paul admonishes the church in Thessalonica to give respect to those who are laboring among them. Well, who's that? Those are pastors and church leaders. Now, many of you know that I've written a book called Spiritual Abuse, How to Break Free from Toxic Churches Without Losing Your Faith. There are a small percentage of leaders in the body of Christ that go the opposite direction. Not only do they demand respect, but God help you if you don't give them respect. There is this unhealthy concept that whenever they say jump, you say how high. Now, that's spiritual abuse, and that's an entirely different subject. I'm talking about the average, quote, run-of-the-mill pastor. Most pastors and leaders are very timid about requiring respect from people in their church. If you establish a culture where people can go around you or usurp your authority or do things without your authorization, you're allowing your church to be destroyed from the inside. Many pastors find themselves out of jobs because they didn't see it coming oftentimes. But a board or a number of people in the church begin to speak about the pastor behind their back. They don't give them the respect. They don't give them the honor that they're due. And before long, people are making decisions without authorization, and the church starts going in different directions. You know, not every leader is led by God. And in our churches, we are raising up leaders, but some leaders have their own ideas of where they want to go. I think you know what I'm talking about. So how do you get respect from people who don't respect you? Well, honestly, Pastor, I'm going to say something that probably frightens you a little bit, but you're going to have to stand up for yourself. Once again, you've heard it said that all churches think about and care about is money. Truth be told, statistically speaking, churches don't speak about money enough. They don't speak about what's needed to do the ministry outside of the church walls. And as a direct result, many people are left with the understanding that they don't need to give, they don't need to contribute, they don't need to get involved. They communicate unknowingly through a sense of being humble. They communicate to people that the church is not that important. When you, as a pastor, allow people to disrespect you, to go around you, to make decisions without your authorization that you are responsible for, you are actually derelict in your duty. You are called to call people into account and say, listen, this is the responsibility that God has given me. This is something you're doing that is violating that, and I need to have a conversation with you. How do you deal with these things? Honestly, just like Jesus said, one-on-one in Matthew chapter 18, 15 through 18. Many people don't seem to apply that to leaders, but it applies to everybody in the body of Christ. And as a leader, if you have somebody in your church, even a fellow leader in your church, who's going around you or is usurping your authority or is doing things without authorization, you need to have a conversation with them. Now, I don't mean, Pastor, that you need to control everything that's going on, but people should not be in the habit of going around you and making decisions without you knowing about it, because that, in effect, is despising your leadership. This is what Paul was warning Timothy about. Don't allow people to belittle you. Don't allow people to disdain you. Don't allow people to disregard your leadership, because you have the responsibility, Timothy, to manage this church. God is going to hold you accountable for it. And each pastor is held accountable for what goes on in the congregation that they're there to serve. Now, you don't have control over people outside of that context, nor should you look for it. And again, that whole dynamic of trying to control people is a whole different subject. And that's not what we're talking about today. But I'm talking about those pastors who have a great heart for God and they want to do what the Lord wants them to do, but they're allowing people to walk over them. They're allowing people to disregard them. They're allowing people to make jokes about them that are not appropriate and just disdain them altogether. Now, I don't mean that you need to have a sourpuss or that you can't enjoy some humor, even at your own expense. But if you're always being put down, or you're always allowing people to belittle you, or you're always allowing people to go around you, you're not doing what God's asked you to do. And it's time to stand up. It's time to say, I'm sorry, we need to have a conversation. First, privately, and say, listen, I don't know if you realize this or not, but you've been going around me. You've been making decisions without my authorization, and I want to challenge you on that. I'm here to serve, and I'm here to be a servant leader, but I have responsibilities, and I want you to know that I take them seriously. When we begin to stand up and speak like that, respect will happen, or people will leave, and that's the biggest fear, isn't it? Many pastors won't stand up for themselves because, especially after COVID, they're afraid of losing more members. Folks, if we don't stand up and speak the truth in love, it doesn't matter how many members we have, because if we have a church of 1,000 and people are disregarding our authority, we don't have anything at all. We don't have anything that Jesus is going to be proud of, and it's going to explode eventually. It's better that you have 100 of people that respect you and that follow your guidance and that include you in the decisions that are in the church, rather than a church where people go around you. And I speak to you, pastors, particularly with respect to boards that you have. Many churches are being run by boards, and that's biblically unscriptural. Pastors are leading the church, and if a board is running pastors around and telling them what to do and how to do it, you need to have a conversation with that board. Have conversation with the head of the board. It's not biblical. The board is there to serve and help you do the work that God has called you to do. So this is just a brief exhortation today, not a real long-winded sermon. I don't think you need more long-winded sermons. But I just wanted to encourage you today, Pastor, that God has given you authority. He's given you responsibility. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be arrogant, but in a humble manner, speak to those people who are going around you and trying to usurp you, because by doing so, they're undermining the Church of Jesus Christ that you are called to serve. So I hope this has been an encouragement to you today. Before we go, if you're interested in pursuing that book that I mentioned earlier about spiritual abuse, I'll have a link for you in the show notes at ministerstoolbox.com. I'm going to be going to Zimbabwe in a few weeks. I'm going to be returning there after COVID stopped me from going last year. We're looking to build our third well over there, and I'll have information about that at ministerstoolbox.com if you'd like to partner with me, partner with us, actually. It's a couple of churches that are now involved in that process. I also want to share with you that I'm involved with a local recovery center here in Connecticut. And if you're in the region and if you have a desire to help people who are hurting from drug addiction or homelessness, this is a ministry that is really worthy of getting involved. I'll have information about that also at the show notes at ministerstoolbox.com. Before we go, as you know, I always share a quote especially for you. This one is anonymous, but it's very powerful. It says, "A lack of boundaries invites a lack of respect." Certainly applies to ministry, doesn't it? Until next time.
For more resources, go to ministerstoolbox.com. Thanks for listening.